Welcome to Beyond Tech, where innovation meets insight.
We're your hosts, Jackie Slatt and Jennifer Palumbo. We bring curiosity, clarity, and a passion for technology-driven storytelling to every conversation. Today's episode, we're taking a bit of a spooky twist. Picture a campfire, a dark forest, and an eerie hum of a control panel gone rogue. If you're the right age, think Are You Afraid of the Dark? The Nickelodeon classic 90s TV show. But instead of a haunted woods, we're diving into haunted HMIs, ghost alarms, and systems that mysteriously crash in the dead of night.
Joining us are two of our seasoned services managers from HeTech Group, Tony McAuliff and Bill Backinger. These guys have faced the scariest support calls imaginable. Everything from phantom faults to zombie systems that just won't die. They're here to share real-life 24/7 support horror stories and how their teams bring critical operations back from the brink. So grab your flashlight, settle in. This is one episode you do not want to listen to alone.
Thanks for joining us, Bill and Tony. In doing some research for this episode, we identified what we're calling the 4 usual suspects that haunt industrial operations when strong support services are missing.
That's right. And with the average cost of downtime reaching about $260,000 per hour, which is terrifying, manufacturers losing up to $50 billion with a B a year. These are not just spooky tales. They're definitely real threats to productivity, safety, and bottom line.
So with that, I want to introduce our usual suspects for support calls. We've got what we're calling the Frankenstein systems. These are patchwork machines that kind of have mismatched software that's stitched together over time. We have the cursed batch. This is a one wrong move and the calibration error, contamination, or a misstep, and the whole batch is doomed. The hexed update, when a routine software update goes wrong, and the wrath of nature, which can include anything from storms, floods, fires. They're the ultimate disruptors. But we want to have Bill and Tony share some of their own experiences with these 4 usual suspects in support. So with that, let's dive into the tales. And I am going to ask Tony, can you kick us off with your story for the Frankenstein systems?
Oh, yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. But yeah, so at a customer local to California food manufacturer, they had a failure on a Monday morning, bought it for almost a week. Another electrical services group. The system was built in the 1960s. So it's a really old relay panel. We're talking, like 6 refrigerator sized cabinets all stacked next to each other with just relays and timers and motor starters and contactors and pretty much everything in it. No color code, no wire labels, no panel documentation. And then my favorite, if I could show you pictures of it, just like failed components that they had cut the line and the load wires off of and put new components in, and like things with sticky notes on them that said bad 1996 or bypassed 2001. So they've just continuously just sort of did what they had to do to keep production running basically at the end of the day. So I can't fault them for that. But definitely the definition of a Frankenstein system. So they called us on a Friday morning after they'd been down for a week, and they had another person troubleshooting it. So, and this was actually one of the first calls I took when I started as a service manager. So showed up and looked at it, was just like, oh man, this is going to be a challenge. And then first thing you ask, okay, so do you have electrical documentation for it? Answer was no, if I hadn't already alluded to that. So that it was just like, oh, okay, so can you tell me how the system operates? Like what's supposed to happen when you push the start button? And it's just like, oh yeah, we push it and then it makes product. It's like, okay, what opens, what turns on? Nobody knew. They had if you've ever seen one of the really old process control panels with a short PNID with lights on it, most of the lights were burned out, so you couldn't tell what was supposed to turn on and what was supposed to turn off. So I just had to start at the start button because that was really all we knew. When it starts, it should start, right? It was a lighted start button, and they did tell me that it's supposed to blink, right? So while it's doing the startup, it's supposed to blink. So they would push the button, it would blink, and then after about 10 seconds, it just would stop. So had to continuity test from the start button through all of these relay circuits to find one relay that wasn't pulling in, and just had to pull on wires and trace everything manually, draw out the circuit to find that one relay that wouldn't pull in, and then followed the control on that relay to some field wire terminal blocks that went down the bottom, and then up and out some conduit. So it was like, okay, cool. We've got at least a device that we can find here. And of course it was followed the conduit up 6 stories because this was a big vertical refrigeration cooling tower. Got to the top, okay, I'm looking for a brown and a blue wire. There's no brown and blue wires in this cabinet. So, go back downstairs, find the junction box. Oh, okay, we changed wire colors here. Oh, we changed wire colors here. Okay, so now I know I'm looking for, the black and the gray wire or whatever. Followed that out to valve on the refrigeration system, happened to be the exhaust valve. So when you push the start button, the exhaust valve should close so that we're not venting cool air to atmosphere. So called down to the control room, okay, push the start button, watch the valve close. The little light on the valve position feedback doesn't turn on. Go investigate that, and it's, oh yeah, it's just got milk powder all over it. So wiped the dust off of it, had him do it again, and it's running. So, 8 hours later of what could have taken maybe 60 minutes with an electrical drawing. What made it really fun was the guy that was working before I got there had figured out that he could bypass that relay with a little toggle switch. So he installed a toggle switch on the door, bypassed the relay. It was like, well, now it starts. It's like, yeah, but it's still not cooling. What are we doing wrong here? So they did learn a pretty valuable lesson about documentation on that one. I followed up with them a couple weeks later, and they had identified the original OEM documentation in a retired manager's garage. So they have that in house now, which is nice. And they have done some cleanup since, but just the size of the panel, capital investment required to actually upgrade that, they haven't pulled the trigger yet. But maybe one day. I'm sure they'll be forced to eventually as these things go.
Wow. So I have just one question. It's a very important one. When you got things up and running, did you yell, "It's alive"?
I did. That's one of those. The thing I really love about service. I'm not designing things. I always tell people, it's a really divergent process when you're talking about designing. It's like we want this to move from here to there. Like there's a million ways to do that. Yeah. But when you're saying, okay, it used to do this and now it doesn't, that's a really convergent. There's usually only one right answer, and when you get it, it just feels so good.
Yeah. And it sounds like a lot of what you do, especially in this instance, because I would imagine you're often running into this issue where you do not have documentation, or at least good documentation. So you're like you're like a sleuth. You're piecing together, or a detective, you're piecing together different things until you get to the real story, right? So
yeah. And I tell people all the time, like, anything you can do to keep me out of your house, I would do it. Right? Documentation is definitely a good first step to make sure you don't have emergency calls.
Yeah, rock and roll.
It sounds like a detective story. You're just kind of following the string until you can get to the whole picture. That's a pretty good story. Bill, do you have an example of a Frankenstein system?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I don't know if it's as Frankensteinish as Tony's, but I do have a pretty good example. It's a chilling tale from the pharmaceutical world. And this particular client had a holiday shutdown, which I know a lot of customers that we have do tend to shut down on holidays, and startup can sometimes cause issues. So power cycles, and then when things come back up, they don't always come back up as planned. So in this instance, customer has a stability monitoring system, which is measuring critical data such as temperatures, etc. And the system would not come back up. It would not pick up any of the sensors. In this instance, we had quite a long day of work to bring this back up due to the nature of the software being extremely outdated and not supported any longer. So in this example, we worked pretty tirelessly, and like you said, where you mentioned like being a sleuth and just looking for answers. And I feel like a lot of the times in support, we are in those situations where we might not have an answer, but we have to figure out a way to get things back up and running. And this was a real instance of that, where we were essentially trying reboots and reconfiguring the program that was available to us, being outdated, reprogramming the nodes to make sure everything would come back up, and even at times just trying the same thing over and over again. Thankfully, in the situation, we were able to get it back up by just repeating troubleshooting steps of reconfiguring the sensors that were throughout the plant. But just the nature of the software being as outdated as it was really caused a big issue that day. Ultimately, with that customer, we've been able to kind of point out to them over time that this was a sort of a ticking time bomb, I would say, because there is really no rhyme or reason to how to get it back up if it goes offline. And we've actually been working with them on updating that recently. So it was a great opportunity for us to make suggestions and help the customer implement a new system and take these future problems out of the mix. So, and I did yell, "It's alive," Jen, once we fixed that one.
I would expect no less. How long did it take you, out of curiosity, to figure it out?
We started troubleshooting that issue. It was Memorial Day. They had a Memorial Day shutdown.
Okay.
Yeah, the Memorial Day shutdown, and we started troubleshooting it Sunday about, I want to say it was around 10 o'clock-ish. It took us roughly 8 hours to get it back up. So it was quite a day of researching and trying things. So thankfully we were able to get them going.
Sounds like that was like like prime barbecue time though. So.
100%. 100%.
I have a question, or you kind of touched on this a little bit, but can you elaborate a little bit on what are the issues with software systems that are no longer supported and why that can cause the need for support?
Yeah, I think a lot of the main thing I would say, just without necessarily causing issues, is just the vulnerabilities that come with outdated software. Once companies decide to shelf a product or not push patches to it, it really puts a facility at risk for cyber attacks. That's number one. Number two, when newer softwares, and even something as simple as like, hey, you have Windows is updating over time, and other components of your environment may be updating, that software is staying the same. So potentially there could come a time and place where that software is just not going to be compatible with other things that you're running. So there's always a risk there when you get outside of that supported window that it's just not going to work. And we always try to identify those with customers and point them out. I think it's a really, really important thing to stay on top of and make sure that it's not causing issues, especially in the pharmaceutical world where downtime is so costly. If you're losing a batch or potentially losing a batch of product, it's worth the investment to update a certain software.
I assume the same thing with actual equipment too, like if a part breaks and it's no longer manufactured, if you have to replace that part, it could be a eBay search to find the part that will fit.
Absolutely. Yeah, Tony, I think we had some discussion about that. You mentioned a curve about items wearing out and things. I think that the way you described that, I think was really good. I don't know if you would mind sharing that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In like maintenance and reliability, which is highly applicable to what we're talking about here, there's like standard probability of failure curves that were produced in, I want to say it was like the 50s or the 60s by the aerospace industry that just characterize when things are most likely to fail. And they call the most popular one's called the bathtub curve, where the beginning of the curve is infant mortality, and then you're just kind of flat, wear outs, just random failures occur, and then you're just kind of flat, and then wear out on the end when things start getting old. And there's things you can do to try to extend the life of equipment, predictive maintenance, preventative maintenance. But then once you get into wear out, which is your obsolete software, your obsolete hardware, they're only rated to last for so long, and that's when the probability of failure really increases. So anything you can do to stay ahead of that. There's plenty of strategies for it. Perfectly acceptable strategy is run to failure, but typically when you make that decision, you should have some sort of criticality associated with that device or piece of equipment so that you know that it really makes sense to run to failure as opposed to replace it before you hit wear out or do that additional preventative or predictive maintenance to get ahead of it. Because the sooner you identify the failure, it's a lot cheaper to fix. And the same thing with obsolete software. The sooner you get started, you do not want to be, you don't want to call Bill for an emergency software upgrade because that's going to be costly. Let us plan things, give us the downtime windows, everything goes a lot smoother and it's a lot less expensive to the end user at the end of the day.
Right.
And then one more thing about the vulnerable software stuff. I don't know if everyone's aware, but they do like a white hat hacker conferences every year. And that's where a lot of the vulnerabilities come out. So it's people are purposely trying to find backdoors and vulnerabilities in active software. And then after those conferences, they're published to the world.
Oh my gosh.
And that's where most of the CISA announcements come from, is the vulnerabilities that were exposed in these conferences so that software manufacturers can close the holes, right? But now everybody knows about it. So it just keeps accelerating. Software is a really tricky one because of the cybersecurity risk.
Yeah, we had a good previous podcast episode. We had a good discussion with the ITOT and the cybersecurity guys on that. And that was a big driver that they said was obsolescence, was a real vulnerability.
Would like to move on to our next usual suspect. This usual suspect is called the cursed batch. And I think when you're producing a batch of life sciences or food and beverage, did one wrong step and you kind of have to lose the whole batch because of contamination or some other issue. So Tony, can you share a story for this suspect and kind of give an example?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. This one, I believe we titled the Ghost Meter. This was a soft drink manufacturer. They had done calibrations on their CIP and process skid over the weekend. and went to start up, went through the normal startup procedure. So they bring syrup to a holding tank before the filler. That whole process went fine. But then as soon as they went to start up the filler, they're getting low flow faults from the holding tank to the bowl. And sure enough, technician on site looks at it and says, yeah, that flow meter is reading 0. So they called us. One of my engineers remoted in and took a look and said, yeah, absolutely. You've got, 0 flow on this flow meter. Can someone go take a look at it? Technician's looking at it while they're trying to start the system before it faults for low flow. And says, no, it's got flow. We're reading 120 gallons per minute. And, then the question starts like, okay, well, have any changes been made recently? This customer actually had quite a bit of documentation in one of the few instances, and we're able to remote in, so they have the infrastructure to support that. So typically those are better documented systems. So my engineer called me in because he's like, hey, we have about 20 minutes before this batch is lost. They have really, really strict rules because it's if you're doing an alcohol product, typically you get a little bit longer, 90 minutes to maybe 4 hours, that things can just sort of sit before you have to start worrying about bacterial growth and contamination and stuff. But with soda and soda syrup, they have 20 minutes. If it sits for 20 minutes, they got to dump the whole thing, and it's a huge tank. So we're talking a really big volume of loss potentially. So he's asking the questions, what's changed? Can you check this? Can you check that? And the technician's like, well, we just calibrated these, so we know they're working. And it's like, well, let's double check the calibration parameters and see what you got. And it's this one happened to be a Rosemount flow meter, which their calibration parameters are embedded in what just kind of looks like a really long serial number. It's just a character string. Not making any calls on that in 20 minutes. So I was looking at the P&ID while he was on the phone with the tech on site, and we've seen a ton of systems that are built almost identical. Looking at the P&ID, I can see there's another flow meter that's basically on the same pipe, just a little further away. And this one's actually owned by the process skid, not owned by the filler. Yeah, I told him, hey, substitute that flow. See if you can message that flow from the CIP process skid over to the filler as quickly as you possibly can. So put in a message instruction, sent that one over, tied it to the tag that says this is the flow rate coming in, and then had him restart the system, and the system ran just fine. Batch saved, nothing dumped to the floor or into the sewer, luckily. And then they, rescheduled calibration for that one on a weekend. I never heard what the issue was, but I'm sure it was just like a single digit out of place kind of thing.
Well, it's good to hear that there was a happy ending to that one at least, right?
Yeah. 20 minutes is tough. It's real tough.
Right.
It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Bill, do you have a fun cursed batch story to share with us?
Yeah, I in the life sciences industry, I had a issue with an autoclave, which it's sterilizing equipment, and we had an issue with some erratic behavior during operation. So what happened here was, and it truly was kind of a horror story in general, where things were just disappearing, and the behavior was super erratic, and it just didn't make a whole lot of sense what was happening. So essentially what was happening, they had the cycles would vanish from selection screens. So this is in Rockwell specifically. So the screens, the cycles would disappear, and they would have a time mismatch. They were having inaccurate clocks. They were lagging. It was really odd. So we ended up shadowing the customer and watching what they were doing remotely. And when they launched the cycle, they would do it. They did the test. Then the control signal for the start function would just start when they typed in a cycle number, which isn't necessarily supposed to happen. And after a lot of investigating, we were able to find that the start button, which is a bit in the coding, was just a stuck bit, was all that was the issue. So essentially what was happening was the user was starting the batch, or the operator was starting the batch. They ran a batch. Then when we went to start the next batch, the other batch, the button was stuck. So when they were typing in a batch number, it would just disappear. So it ended up not being as big of an issue, and is a very simple fix of just manually undoing the start button. But we were able to recode it. The coding actually was not wrong, but we recoded it a different way so that would not happen again. But it was a very odd one. They were in the process of running, so it was very critical that we got that figured out. It took us about an hour to resolve. So at least the discovering the stuck bit part. So the coding of it was a little bit longer because we had to test and go through all the documentation work for that. But as far as just getting them back up and running, it was thankfully not too painful.
And were you able to save the batch?
Yes.
Excellent.
Both batches saved.
So I think we talked a little bit. You mentioned the importance of software updates and patches coming out to keep vulnerabilities away from a system. But sometimes those updates seem to cause a little problems. Bill, would you like to kick this one off? Would you like to tell your story of the hexed update?
Yeah, absolutely. I know there's a few really well-known patches recently that I think a lot of folks are familiar with. The one I'd like to talk about was Microsoft's decom patch in working with Factory Talk. So a few years ago, Microsoft was pushing out a decom hardening patch to Windows, which really caused issues with Factory Talk. Factory Talk and Rockwell in general combat that, pushed a patch roll up. I mean, there was a lot of other work that was involved to make sure all the communications were right to account for the patch that Microsoft had pushed. And with this customer in particular, they were very proactive, and we did a lot of work prior to this to make sure they were prepared. Unfortunately, there was some issues with, once the patch was out, that it did clash with some of the legacy configurations that we had in place there. It did stop production for a short amount of time, and the update, making sure the right patch levels were everywhere with the Rockwell software ended up being part of the issue with that particular site. So getting the correct patch roll up in place, and then we had to reconfigure some users, and then also run some different compatibility checks to get the site functional. In this instance, the customer was, like I said, was very proactive, and we had a window where we knew we were pushing a pretty critical update that we knew could cause production loss. So they were aware and in a good spot, and had I don't want to say they had downtime schedule, but they were prepared to be down. Mm-hmm. So thankfully it didn't cause too much of an impact to production, and we were able to honestly, it was one of the most, sometimes in support, ideal support world, you get one person working on a support ticket and they just kind of handle it and figure it out. This was one of the instances where we had, I want to say, kind of the full power of our engineers and resources to try to get this customer back up and running, because it was just a large effort. When something like that, where it's impacting a lot of your systems, not just necessarily one machine, it's a group effort. So that was a really good instance where we were able to all work together and get things back up and running for the customer.
How does that work? Do you have a bat phone or something when you're doing that?
Yeah.
How do you escalate that?
It's a red phone.
Red phone.
A lot of it just depends. So this customer in particular they did have a service agreement with us at the time. So we have dedicated resources in place for them. And then also I think as a company in general, and as just support in general, whatever needs to be done for our customers, we're going to go as hard as we can and try to figure out a way to help. So in most instances, when we have an issue like that, especially during business hours, we're able to pull in project resources that are familiar with sites. We had quite a few folks at that time that were very familiar with those sites, and we were able to pull them in and use that. So a lot of the times we do have dedicated resources that are familiar on standby if our dedicated support staff can't handle something.
Nice to have that backup.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, a lot of the times our support team does have a very good understanding of the sites, and they're very familiar, but we do always have we always want to have higher level, even SMEs on standby, so we can get customers back up and running. It's super important.
So you mentioned that this customer, you knew this update was coming out and had done a lot of preparation beforehand, but I think this is the same update that went out that people who were not prepared probably did not get back up and running as soon. Is that, am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, absolutely. I know a lot of our customers, we sent out warnings to customers that this was coming, just to be prepared. And a lot of the time, even if we're not handling patching for customers, which in this case, this customer, we patch for them on a quarterly basis. So one of the things that we're responsible for with support is patching for them. We were able to identify the issues and really get ahead of it on a regular basis. This isn't necessarily the only example of this being a patch that could cause problems for customers. And really there's patches that get pushed out through Windows all the time. I don't want to say all the time, but occasionally there's patches that get pushed out that do cause problems that people aren't planning for either. So in this case, it's just we are able to handle patching for them and identify, hey, this patch is going to cause problems. We have a lot of work we're going to need to do to get ready for this, along with the coordination of just the site being prepared if things are down. It was a good opportunity for that. So they didn't impact production. So yeah, I think the patching part for us has been extremely successful in avoiding those vulnerabilities. With this customer in particular, we've been patching for them for, I think it's been 4 years now, 5 years, 4 or 5 years, and it's been a very successful operation. And vulnerabilities there we've really stayed on top of the Rockwell patching and Windows patching in their environment, which I know a lot of times is a challenge for the IT group because they're not necessarily familiar with the OT environment, and they don't always want to, not necessarily that they don't want to deal with it, but they don't necessarily have the familiarity with the production equipment and the software that goes along with that and what the patches will and won't impact. So I think that really sets us apart as far as patching goes. It gives us a really good, we have the understanding of everything. If something is going to go wrong, we typically know about it ahead of time and we can typically mitigate it beforehand.
Awesome. Now, Tony, do you have a story to share with us?
Oh, yes, ma'am. Yeah. So this one winery customer actually, and their IT group had just done some network infrastructure upgrades, and they had done them over the weekend. Went to start up on a Monday, and they have an Ignition server that runs their bottling floor. The Ignition server's in the server room. You've got network gear that gets it out to the plant floor, and they went to start up, and Ignition just had little red X's everywhere. None of the tags are connected. Actually, just wasn't connected to the gateway because the client couldn't make it back to the server room. So their IT team worked through it the entire week, basically, and then they said, okay, we need additional support. So we got the call, like 6 o'clock on a Friday morning of that same week. So I sent one of my service engineers out there, and he pretty much immediately identified that they had Mac flapping on some of the new network gear that they put in that has the home run to the server room. And that's about where most of my engineers' expertise is going to end. Like we've got pretty good chops as far as troubleshooting Ethernet networks, but once you start getting into, okay, I've got duplicate devices on this network is what a Mac flap is, right? And it's in the IT gear. So it's like, well, can we prove it? Yeah, okay, unplug that cord. Okay. Mac flapping went away when we removed that Ethernet cable. There's a problem in the IT gear. So, reported out to the customer immediately, told them, yeah, you have a problem with the new gear. And they're like, well, can you help us with that? I was like, well, I can't, but I do know someone who can. So called the director of our IT/OT team. I was like, hey, I need somebody in California like yesterday. And he made an engineer available to us that was able to remote into the customer system and work through a bunch of issues that I don't fully understand as far as spanning tree protocols. And, I read the report. Most of it was just wizardry, IT wizardry at the end of the day for me. But I was blown away because, usually I'm the guy that picks up the phone at 4 a.m. I had somebody in the Midwest that was able to just jump on it right away, worked through it all day Friday and then a little bit Saturday to do some cleanup, and checked with them on Saturday. It's like, yeah, everything's looking pretty good. We still have one little issue. Can we get that guy back on the phone? And in the meantime, we actually were standing up Ignition server on like a small tower that we were just going to go install on the bottling floor. That's the one thing that's nice with Ignition. Moving it from one hardware to another is relatively simple. So they were going to be bottling Monday morning, one way or another. But luckily, our IT/OT team, wizards, took care of it.
I concur. They are wizards.
Yeah, stay tuned for the next episode with the wizards.
Yeah, right. Oh, yes, another plug. Oh, man, this is great. That's great. Those are both great examples. Now we have one last usual suspect, and this one is kind of out of any plan or preparation. It's just what we're calling the wrath of nature. You can, I guess, be as prepared as you can, but you can't schedule downtime around Mother Nature. So, Tony, can you share your story around the impact of Mother Nature?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So this is one of my service customers. They have a eTech Advantage contract, so priority support, lower rates for emergency requests, that sort of thing. And then we give them lower rates on disaster recovery backups as well. So we had recently completed disaster recovery backup where we go in and we back up every piece of hardware that you have, HMIs, PLCs, VFD parameters, so that anything goes out, you're covered. It's not redesigning from the ground up. It's just copy paste replaced, put it in off and running. So this one, we had some particularly bad storms in California. Their power went out on a Sunday, came back up early Monday morning. They went to start the line. And this one, if I remember correctly, I want to say it was like a bun seeder or something like that. And they just can't run without seeds, apparently. It's not something they can, oh yeah, divert it. We'll add the seeds later kind of thing, you know? So line's down, and this was at like 4 a.m. They called the emergency support hotline. We had an engineer there within 60 minutes, looked at the PLC, said, yep, it's dead. Major fault, red light. You can't revive this one. Happened to be a Micrologix 1000, so obsolete hardware. So you're not going to find, this is one of those eBay things. You know, Rockwell's not making them anymore. They're not selling them. So we looked for aftermarket, anything nearby. Of course not. So it was, all right, well, what can we do? And the obvious answer for that one was, okay, well, we can just put in a Micrologix 1400. It's a relatively simple conversion to go from the 1000 to the 1400. Different wire sizes, they always change just enough to make it a little more difficult for you. But So we put together a plan, presented the cost to the customer. You know, we've got this in the panel shop in Modesto. We can go to local distributor to get this stuff. So I was the parts courier that day while my engineer was working on pulling the PLC out, labeling all the wires and stuff like that. I came back with PLC, some terminal blocks, a couple different control relays that we needed to do, switch some signals, and converted it, retagged the HMI, did the world's fastest IO checkout, and they were up by like probably noon. So what could have been really bad, I get quite a few calls where people do not have backups and they've got dead PLCs, and it's like, oh well, it only does this. It's like, yeah, but if you don't know how it did that, it's really, really difficult to just like make it do it again, sort of thing. So yeah, definitely pre-planning in the disaster recovery backups, and having us on speed dial really, really saved them from what could have been at least a few days of outage.
Ouch. Now, what about you, Bill? You got any Mother Nature stories for us?
Yeah, mine isn't necessarily in the realm of like a natural disaster, but more so just around the elements. I had a customer, and this was actually only a couple months ago, that had they're located next to the ocean, and the server, which was one of the pictures of this server, is pretty mind blowing how exposed to the elements it was, with the kind of moisture that the fog would roll in, and the air, the wet, like salty air would get to this server. It was almost rusty looking. So
the fog would roll in.
Yeah, the fog would roll in.
Better imagery.
And that's how the guy described it. He's like, man, the fog rolls in, and he's like, the fog rolls in, and it's like, he's like, I have no control over it. And it was a Stratus server, so super, super high end, not in great shape, and it failed on them, which once we saw pictures of it, we really weren't surprised that it had issues. So in that instance, we were able to work with Stratus and get them on a call, and they were able to get the server back up and running. But in that scenario also, they lost their data because the drive was bad. So we were thankfully able to locate a backup and get the data back for the customer. And it took us once the server was operational again, we were able to get on site within a day, and we were able to get the data back up on there in a day. So it wasn't as well planned as Tony's, where the customer invested in doing disaster recovery, which is a huge thing. And you never know when those kinds of things are going to happen, but not even necessarily that, just having a really good backup protocol in place and having those things accounted for. So if something like that does happen, you have a good backup. Thankfully, this customer did have a backup, and we were able to get them back and going, but it was the mystic fog rolling in was the cause of the problem there, and ultimately a good outcome, and no data was lost. So
yeah, that's huge. Do you find that you work with clients, or do you try to work with clients as often as you can on the planning part of it for what could happen and how that might relate to maintenance and support?
Absolutely. I like with this customer in particular, we've had multiple instances where we were dealing with backups and helping them with backups, and we've been able to identify inefficiencies in their backup process and what risk they're potentially taking by doing things the way they are currently doing. Ultimately, the customer in any instance, it's really up to them to want to move forward and spend the dollars. But like we said earlier, the investment is well worth it when you're talking about losing critical data. And really, it's not, I don't want to say it's even industry dependent, because pretty much every industry that we deal with has some sort of data that they're capturing that's necessary, whether it's food and beverage, which Tony, I know, works a lot in, pharma, which I have a lot of support customers in pharma, and even consumer goods. There's different things that have to be tracked, and having that data at risk of being lost if a catastrophe happens is a major a major problem that is easily remedied. Now, it's not easily remedied if you in the Midwest, you get hit by a tornado, or you have a fire, or in California, a wildfire comes in and wipes the plant out. We're talking about a larger scale thing, obviously, but servers fail, hardware fails,
Right.
even if it's unexpected. So we definitely try to point these things out to our customer, and that's one thing we really try to do in support is analyze tickets that we get over time and look for trends and have regular check-ins with our customers and communicate to them some things that we see, that whether it leads to us doing a project or not.
Yeah.
Sometimes support tickets lead to that kind of work, which is great for us as a company, but ultimately we just want to put our customer in a really good situation to be successful and to not run into these issues. I think Tony and my goal, Tony, I don't want to speak for you, but my goal is I don't want to talk to the customer.
Right.
I don't want them to have issues. Not that I don't like the people that I work with that are customers, but I don't want them to have these issues. So
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy what I do, so I don't mind the 2 a.m. calls, but if a little more proactivity keeps that from happening, everybody wins in that scenario. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I like the concept of the tickets kind of telling a story, and if there's a way that you can give them any kind of proactive information as a part of the reactive work that you guys do, that's, the nature of your business is reaction, but that's really cool add-on.
Really appreciate you guys sharing the different stories and kind of playing along with our theme for the episode and sharing some of these, like Jen said, terrifying stories. But I want to give a chance to kind of get to know you guys a little bit better. I guess maybe we should have started with this, but we'll see where this ends up. But how did you guys both end up in your career in engineering and system integration? Tony?
Started by accident. Mine was, I was originally going to be a musician, and then decided I wanted to be like a studio engineer, production. And then I was like, well, those guys are typically electrical engineers. Let me look into that. I started taking electrical engineering and was like, wow, I'm really actually very good at like the math and the control systems analysis and stuff. So graduated with my 4-year degree, and then realized that, Marshall and Line 6 aren't making products in the US, really, definitely not in California. And I wasn't looking to relocate. So my wife actually worked at a winery that was building a high-speed bottling and warehouse. And she was like, they're hiring technicians. Just like, I'll give it a shot. My engineering interviews are going so well, apparently. And yeah, got started there. My the controls manager took a chance on me, gave me space and time to learn, and been doing it ever since. I've always had a pretty good knack for programming, and once I started doing PLCs, it was just never looked back.
That's awesome.
What about you, Bill?
Yeah, so I also wouldn't say that I purposely was getting into this industry, and I started out my career in the printing industry, and I worked in color management, which is I guess I got a little taste of manufacturing, working with different printers and whatnot, but I was really into the science part of color and doing those things and troubleshooting just different issues we had on the pre-press side. So I worked in pre-press printing. So essentially when you have printing industry, you have pre-press, which is they build out the graphics and make it so they can print it on press. And I really enjoyed the troubleshooting part of that. I moved from that to work for a support company in a totally different realm, which was I worked for a manufacturing ERP software company for 5 years. And I worked in support. So I knew that I loved the troubleshooting aspect of things. And it really gave me a lot of technical knowledge working in SQL, working in SaaS software and different things. And I really worked, I want to say it was very much support. I've managed support there. And I really learned a lot of what I'm able to apply to our 24/7 support from that job. Ultimately, I was looking for a way to have a bigger impact, and more so than working on a singular software. I really wanted to have an impact on manufacturing. I thought was a great avenue for that. It really impacts kind of our day to day. When you really think about it, the things that we use, and eTech had just a great opportunity for someone to kind of develop the services. And I think Tony out west is in a similar boat where we really have opportunity to build our support services out the way we think they should be, and offer customers great service. And that's something that I really loved I really love is taking care of customers. I've always kind of been very customer focused, and it's the support part of it is really the customer service aspect of that is huge too. So again, not traditional by any means getting into this space. I wouldn't say I'm a traditional engineer by heart, but
I love that.
It's great.
Those are great stories, great origin stories for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I waited tables in college. That was my that was my customer service.
Yeah, everybody should do that.
yeah. So I definitely, I could still do a spiel on some prime steak if you want, but yeah, I always, customer interaction has always been a lot of fun.
Well, I want to thank you guys for both being with us today. I have a couple of what I call fun questions that I like to wrap up our podcast episodes with, and what I would like to ask both of you is, if you could have coffee with any inventor or engineer, past or present, who would it be? Anybody want to go first?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So I am a self-proclaimed nerd. I really take deep dives into things. Just kind of how my brain works. I get really focused on things, and I love golf and golf equipment. It's kind of a hobby of mine. My wife gets very frustrated that I'm always buying and selling and trading golf clubs and tinkering with things in my garage. So Carsten Solheim, he was an engineer, and he actually worked for GE and Boeing and did a lot of aerospace engineering early in life, and in his 40s he got into golf and similarly tinkered and ended up developing a golf company out of his garage called Ping. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it. If you golf, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no.
But he
super obscure.
Yeah.
So he super obscure. Anyways, he developed a lot of the golf technology that's still used today, and he had over 100 patents in golf.
Wow.
So I'd really like to pick his brain and talk to him. So I think that would be really neat.
Great answer.
What about you, Tony?
Mine, I learned about this guy in college, Charles Steinmetz. He was before they really had electrical engineers. He was an electrical engineer he grew up in Germany, had to flee for political reasons, ended up in the U.S., worked for GE. I want to say he worked for Edison, and he was they called him the Wizard of Schenectady, if I remember correctly. He lived in New York. He was a very like Nikola Tesla kind of figure, like played with high voltage, had demonstrations in his lab of, huge lightning bolts. He did a lot of study on the effects of lightning on power distribution systems, and he wrote a lot of the theory that allows modern day power transmission. What was like the theory of hysteresis. He did the math for the theory of hysteresis, and he was just like all around known as just like the expert on this sort of stuff. The story though that always stood out that I originally heard about him, he got called into Ford to take a look at a generator for one of their plants. Apparently Henry Ford asked for him by name, and this is why I'd like to have coffee with him, because I want to know how much of this story is actually true. So he shows up at the plant, and they're like, "What do you need?" And he's like, "I just need a pencil and a notebook and like a place to sleep." So he slept in the plant for 2 days doing calculations and taking measurements on this massive generator. And on the second day, he comes out and he says, and he asks for a ladder, climbs up on a ladder, draws a X with a piece of chalk on this generator and says, remove that plate and replace the 6 windings behind it. So they do that. Generator starts functioning at full capacity, and Ford asks for a bill. They send him a bill for $10,000. This is in like 1910 or something like that. So that's like something like probably like $150,000, $200,000 for 2 days that he's charging Ford. And supposedly, again, this is why I really like to hear it. Supposedly Ford asked for an itemized invoice. So Charles Steinmetz did the invoice himself, and he said it was $1 for making the chalk mark, $9,999 for knowing where to put it.
That's awesome.
Just like, yeah, and it's just it's a really good lesson on it's not necessarily the actions, it's the experience.
Yep.
Is where we get the value.
Oh, those are great stories, guys. Those are great answers.
Yeah. Rapid fire. Last 2 questions is, how would you describe your job to a 5-year-old? And then what topics would you like to see us cover on future episodes of Beyond Tech?
So I have a 4 and a 7-year-old and a 1-year-old. So
You're all over this.
Yeah, I'm all over it. I was trying to think about how the best way to do this. So I thought I was trying to explain it as like I'm a superhero and I watch over giant machines in factories. And there's robots that work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, making yummy treats, toys, or medicine. And then they never get a break. So I lead a superhero squad to zoom in and fix any villainous problems super fast, day or night. And these are special powers to keep everything safe, strong, and running smooth.
That's awesome.
And any ideas for future episodes you'd like to see us cover?
I'm really interested in just new technologies, any new technology that our company in general is utilizing. I think that's great to share that knowledge out with everybody and really show capabilities of what we have. I'd love to watch that.
Awesome. All right, Tony, what you got?
Oh, mine's super quick. I just say I'm a machine veterinarian. My patients can't talk.
You guys both have some great answers for these.
That usually, I had 2 3-year-olds and a 7-year-old, and that usually gets the point across. And it's, where are you going today, Daddy? It's like, oh, I went to a chocolate factory. That's why you smell like chocolate. Yes, it is.
Second question.
And then
did you bring any
future
home?
episodes. Oh, I'm sorry, what?
I said your child's second question.
Oh,
did you bring any home from the chocolate?
Did I bring it home? Yeah. This one in particular has samples at the door, so I did that day. Yeah.
Perfect. Smart move.
Yeah. And then future episodes, I'd like to see something about recruiting, hiring and keeping engineering talent, because that's kind of the core of our business. And I think it's what we do really well because, again, if I didn't state it enough, the magnitude of engineering talent that we have. When I first started, I was blown away. I always thought I was really good. And then I started working here. I was like, wow, I'm just kind of middle of the road. So, how we do that.
I think you guys both sound great. Well, that's all I have for you guys today. All the questions. I just want to thank you again for being with us and sharing some spooky stories with us and letting us get to know you guys both a little better. I hope you guys had fun as well. I enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, this was great.
Thanks for having us.